people get started. Hello, everyone on Zoom. Good morning, everyone. I think we're supposed to start at 12:10. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna get started. So good morning, everyone. I just want to introduce myself. My name is on the handout. I'm Dr. Shana Rosenblatt-Maurer. I'm a lecturer here at Schechter, also at Herzog College, if you're familiar with it, in Lund-Schfut, and also Spertus College in Chicago. And my field is contemporary Jewish literature. And so today I'm going to be talking about the writer Chava Rosenfarb. And why I've introduced Chava Rosenfarb is because the theme of this conference is renewal, rejuvenation. Not so much resilience, not mourning, not loss. We're looking forward now. And Chava Rosenfarb, the story we're going to look at might seem a little bit ironic considering the topic, because it's about a Holocaust survivor, and the story itself doesn't seem necessarily that dynamic. It doesn't seem like it's full of that much vitality, but I'm going to argue that there is a tremendous amount of rejuvenation in ordinary life. And I think that we've seen that in Israel over 3 years, that we keep saying we just want to get back to routine. We just want schools to be in session. We want to get back to work. I don't think we want traffic back. That might be the one exception. But generally speaking, there's something healing, recuperative about life going on and about the ordinary business of life.
Okay, I have one question.
Dream trip to Fiji or winning the Israel Prize. But everyday, ordinary life can be very healing. And it's interesting, I'm just going to take a moment for us to think about
Got to clean all around that every week.
There's something talking.
You can see
next door.
The last session, there was a whole bunch of music from Shula Resnick's class.
Oh my goodness. Okay. The Jewish calendar keeps us very much engaged in ordinary life. We have the weekly cycle of Shabbat is coming. And Shabbat, to a certain extent, you can feel like, oh, here it comes again, and I've got to get ready again. On the other hand, it keeps us moving forward, because you cannot simply be static. You have to get ready. Our holidays come. Our life cycle events come, and it keeps us very much engaged in sort of, I would say, a forward motion of life. And on the one hand, it's cyclical. On the other hand, year by year, we keep moving ahead with our life. We don't get stuck. You can't just sit and twiddle your thumb for 3 months, because you have to prepare your Purim Suda. So I think Judaism keeps us on that track. So I've just written a few things here on the board. The writer we're going to be talking about is Chava Rosenfarb, but I'll get to that in a minute. There are 3 ways we're going to look at ordinary life through the lens of this Holocaust survivor story. Everyday life, motherhood, and writing. We're going to talk about those three things. And I'm going to be mentioning very much in passing, but I put these writers on the board just so you know who I'm talking about in case I don't say it clearly enough. So we're going to get started. When you are writing about trauma, tragedy, horrors, historical horrors, there's a real challenge for writers. Because on the one hand, there's a deep need to write. There's a deep need to tell the story. There's a deep need for the narrative. On the other hand, you don't want to write in a way that is
This wasn't on the table, so I didn't take it. Huh?
Unreadable for readers, and you don't want to write it in a way that becomes trite or cliche.
Okay. I'm going to probably eat something light.
Is there a way to stop that?
Must be, but I'm not.
Shana, hi, it's Debbie from the Zoom. Shana, hi. Hi. Shana, hi. Patty is not on mute. Patty.
Sorry, Debbie?
Patty, who's on the Zoom, is not on mute. So just mute us all. Mute us all.
Oh, okay. Good thinking, Debbie.
It wasn't protected. Except yourself, don't mute yourself.
Right.
Debbie saved us.
Okay, I didn't realize.
Okay. So, what is a writer to do? And there have been different strategies, and I'm going to look at Holocaust writers because I think that's probably one of the most obvious examples. Holocaust writers, we start off with Primo Levi. Primo Levi starts writing very shortly after Shoah, and it's fact. It is nothing spared. It is what happened.
Was he
And
a Holocaust survivor?
Primo Levi survived Auschwitz.
Auschwitz.
And he was Italian, and he was incarcerated in Auschwitz. And he writes the facts. Nothing is euphemistic, and nothing is kind of blurred. One strategy. Another strategy is the poet, Dan Pagis. Dan Pagis, very profound, very kind of succinct, very painful poetry, images, metaphor, not the facts. He is able to evoke tremendous emotion and feeling with very few words, but it's not the facts. And then we go to a writer like Aaron Appelfeld, the Israeli writer Aaron Appelfeld. All of them are Holocaust survivors, by the way. And Appelfeld does something completely different. He writes in a Kafkaesque way, surreal, metaphor, and you have to tease apart the writing. In his kind of trademark novel, Badenheim, 1939, there is this bizarre encounter of this Jewish group, and it's an allegory for the fall of the Jews of Germany. But it's all kind of pastiche, blurred. So 3 different ways of dealing with horror, because writers do not want to be redundant. They want to have impact, and they don't want to be saccharine. They don't want to somehow be telling the story in a way where the story becomes more important than the events. But what happens is we get to the end of the 20th century, and how many more Holocaust stories can you tell? How much more can you tell about a horror? How many more stories can you hear about concentration camps, about catacombs? And it's a problem.
Yes.
So then we have the 21st century, and we have a writer like Jonathan Safran Foer, who turns horror into carnivalesque absurdity. If you've read Everything is Illuminated, it's a novel where the Holocaust is just so incredibly bizarre. He turns it on a head, and he sort of evokes the absolute absurdity of the evil, of the depth of the evil. Or you have a sacrilegious writer like Sholem Auslander. Sholem Auslander, interesting, comes from a rabbinic family, not a family of Holocaust survivors. He wrote a novel called Hope and Tragedy. People get very upset about this novel. It is an extremely sacrilegious Holocaust novel, wherein a Jewish family moves to a new house in upstate New York, and they keep hearing noises in the attic, and lo and behold, there is a woman, a haggard old woman, upstairs with her typewriter, writing away. Who is it? Who's in an attic who writes? Anne Frank. And she didn't die, she survived, and she's in an attic in upstate New York. It's called Hope, a Tragedy. And the book, he's not doing this because he thinks the Holocaust is funny. He's not doing it just to be a smart aleck. He's doing it because he's questioning what has come to be called, and this is a very controversial term, the culture industry of the Holocaust, or the Holocaust industry. And you might have heard this term. There's no business like Shoah business. And the idea of exploiting Anne Frank for Broadway profits. Exploiting Holocaust imagery, and this was a big issue with Schindler's List, right? Schindler's List. Now, on the one hand, it brought the Holocaust to an enormous number of people who might not have had much contact with the Holocaust. On the other hand, it's a big razzmatazz Hollywood production, and if you recall, the penultimate scene of Schindler in the factory, you know, you are all so important to me, I saved you all, and it's sort of like this, almost like, you know, high school graduation. You expect everyone to throw their caps in the air. Off-putting to many. One more work, Life is Beautiful. Did you ever see the movie Life is Beautiful? Yes. A lot of criticism of that movie. Life was not beautiful. The Holocaust is not beautiful.
That's the whole satire.
Well, people say it's a satire, but on the other hand, it sort of doesn't satire. It's not the producers. Do you remember the producers? Right, Mel Brooks. That everyone knows is a satire. It's so far-fetched and it's so ridiculous. It's satire. Life is Beautiful. People could see it and think, well, the concentration camps weren't so bad.
But he's showing that how bad they were, that he had to hide it from his son. And you know, here again, you're going into the thing of interpretation.
It's true. It's true. It's true. But let me share with you some of the reactions to those movies. If you will notice, in Life is Beautiful, the Italians are grouped in with the Jews. The Italians are prisoners. The Italians were not grouped in with the Jews. And the Italians did not suffer like the Jews. It was war. It was World War. It was horrific. But the experience of the Jews in World War II was not the experience of the Italians, and it's conflated. Another issue is that people who don't know anything about the Holocaust don't understand it's a satire. They don't understand it's a satire. I bring all this up because we are now 2.5 years after October 7th. And an enormous amount of literature has come out, an enormous amount of writing. And it's different. There's a range. And what do writers do? To avoid the accusation of inaccuracy. Oh, that's not how it was. It wasn't that bad. That's not really what they did, right? How do they avoid becoming just another October 7th story? How do they avoid maybe being satirical without people who are the uninformed readers not misunderstanding? All of these issues are relevant. Now, I'm going to put all of this aside, and I'm going to go to Chava Rosenfarb. Chava Rosenfarb is a Yiddish writer. She survives the Holocaust. She is in prison. She grows up in Lodz. Lodz was one of the big centers of Yiddish culture. It was a very well-known Jewish community. And she's already writing from a young age. She's incarcerated with her family, with all of the Jews of Lodz, in the Lodz ghetto, 1941. She's 18 years old. By 1943, the Lodz ghetto, very controversial ghetto because of the leader Chaim Ramkovsky. If you know who he is, it was a very, very complicated relationship with the Nazis, but eventually the Lodz ghetto is liquidated. Chava Rosenfarb, she survives. She is first in the ghetto, then she's in a work camp, finally in Auschwitz, and then in Bergen-Belsen, finally liberated from Bergen-Belsen with her mother and sister. Her father's killed, and eventually makes it to Canada. Before the war, she'd been a poet. She had been a poet.
A poet, yeah.
When she got to Canada, she switched over to prose because she felt like it was the only genre that could really encapsulate what she wanted to write about. Now, this leads us right into everyday life. Prose is considered the pickup truck of literature. What does that mean? Poetry is the Cadillac. Poetry is the Bentley or the Rolls Royce. Drama is the Porsche or the Lamborghini. Prose is the pickup truck. It's a workhorse. When you want to tell a story, when you want to go deep, when you really want to make sure that what you're saying is understood and contains a lot of meat, you go for prose. And that's what she did. She switched to prose because she wanted her writing to have that robustness. She didn't want it to be delicate like poetry. She didn't feel the Holocaust suited her. Her Holocaust writing suited poetry. She went for prose. So she went for that everyday kind of writing. And I think that even today, there's a sense of poets are sort of lofty spiritual people, right? Novelists are the people who are going for the book deals, right? They're a little bit more brass tacks, down to earth. Okay. So Chava Rosenfarb, in a way, provides us what I'm going to call our Ur text of Jewish revitalization. Ur means a formative text, a base text. And she writes these texts that have a lot to do. Now, her magnum opus is a 3-volume work called The Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is about life in the Lodz ghetto, and I'm going to put that on the side because it is not a work of revitalization. It's a work of tragedy. But when she got to Canada, after finishing The Tree of Life, Chava Rosenfarb started writing short stories. And these short stories are about renewal, building a life, and being a survivor. Being a victim, and I think I can say this about the Holocaust now in 2026, being a participant in a Jewish history riddled with anti-Semitism and persecution. And I don't want to say that's the whole Jewish story. It's not the whole Jewish story. But unfortunately, it's a big part of the Jewish story. And so she's thinking about, how do I do this? How do I write these stories? And in the story that we're going to be looking at, it's called A Friday in the Life of Sarah Zona Bent. I don't have my own source sheet.
Oh, here.
A Friday in the Life of Sarah Zona Bent. That is the name of the story.
Is it called Friday or Day?
A day.
Oh, so A Day in the Life.
A day in the life.
Oh, you know what?
I
I don't remember now. I think I made a mistake. I'll have to look it up. Oh, A Friday in the Life of Sarah Zona Bent. I made a mistake. A Friday in the Life of Sarah Zona Bent. And I'm just going to share with you quickly the plot so that we can follow along what happened in the story. So this story was first published in English in 2004, but it was written sometime in the 80s in Yiddish. The English came out in a collection edited by Michael Greenstein in 2004. And then Chava Rosenfarb's short stories all together were translated, well, largely translated, but also put together a collection by her daughter, Goldie Morgenthaler. Just parenthetically, Goldie Morgenthaler became an academic of Jewish literature, of Yiddish literature. We're colleagues and friends. We both studied at McGill, and she has really been the champion of Chava Rosenfarb's
Question.
Sure.
Do you by any chance know if she was influenced by Langston Hughes? Because he has a story One Friday Morning.
I suspect not. I don't think, for Chava Rosenfarb, interestingly, her literary landscape was European. A little bit Canadian, but not even Yiddish. European, which is really interesting. When she talks about her formative influences, she goes to Tolstoy and Chekhov. She doesn't go to Shalom Aleichem.
So Mark's written in English.
She was raised in Yiddish. Her family's lifeblood was Yiddish. Lodz was a very Yiddish city, and it was for her. It was her mother tongue, and it was everything. It wasn't everything to her, but it was everything to her in terms of expression.
It was the deepest.
It was, but it's interesting that her literary interests were very European and not necessarily. And how do I know this? She wrote a collection of essays. One of them is called Confessions of a Yiddish Writer, where she talks about a lot about her influences.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm confused. A Day in the Life of Sarah Zona Bent is a character, but it's written by Chava Rosenfarb?
First of all, I made a mistake. It's a Friday in the life of Sarah Zona Bent, and it's a short story. And it's written by Chava Rosenfeld.
Okay, it doesn't say that on the sheet, I was trying to find, okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
my shortcoming there. Okay, so here's the plot. The whole story takes place on a single Friday in Montreal. That's where Chava Rosenfeld lived. This is where Sarah Sonnenben lives. And it's a woman in a somewhat melancholic state going about her household chores. She tied in her teenager's room. She's grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, mending, greeting the neighborhood mailman. And to an outsider, one would think this is sort of just middle-aged malaise. A woman dealing with her children getting ready to leave the nest, a rather tepid marriage, and just a kind of semi-depressed state. But then we find out that there's more going on, and that she, in fact, is a Holocaust survivor. And that almost all of the difficult / horrific events of her life have happened on a Friday. Hence the name of the story, A Friday in the Life of Sarah Sonnenben. The story ends, however, with this line, and it seems so banal. You're going to think, how could this be the big punchline? She writes in her diary, "Today is Friday, and thank heaven, nothing happened." Now, it seems trite. Oh, well, today, there was a children's book, Alexander and the Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, right? It's not quite like that. We're going to see through the story that that's not the case.
Today's Friday.
Today's a
When
Friday.
I woke up today, I said, isn't it lucky we can be here today? Because when we had to go into our Nicolai, one day was.
Yeah,
I went right back in it and everything's going to be canceled. So I don't think it's right. I think to those of us who have suffered all of this over these, since October 7th.
I think,
and
look,
last year was canceled.
Yes, it's a blessing that you're
It's
there.
absolutely.
I think it's a really good point. Chava Rosenfeld was not traditional, and her daughter Goldie, I think it's fair to say, I think Goldie would say this is true, is quite unfamiliar with Jewish tradition. But what's ironic, I mean, it mentions in the story that Friday in the camp, it was we'll get to a passage about a little bit of tradition. But think about this: Friday is the worst day for Jews to have things go on, things go wrong, right? Whose oven is ever broken on a Friday? Refrigerator dying on a Friday. These are not good days to have it happen. You remember that. Friday is a bad day. You don't want we all know, right? You don't want to have to go. You don't want to sprain your ankle on a Friday, right? You don't want to have to go to the emergency on a Friday. So it really resonates Jewishly, right?
Study days on Friday.
Yeah, right, you want to say that
Once a year.
it's on a Friday.
Well, it's an exception. Okay, so that's about, and when she writes it, thank goodness, it is a testament to normalcy, to the ordinary. We can take so much comfort in the ordinary, just like you said. Oh, it's an ordinary Friday. We're going to be able to drive, we're going to be able to have the women's study day. It's an ordinary. And I think that's what is so great in this literary text, that the ordinary shows us a way towards recuperation. Okay, excuse me. So, I want to now backtrack a bit. I lost my pen. I want to backtrack a bit, and I want to go to our first source, and just talk about how Chava Rosenfeld does such a good job in terms of avoiding this pitfall of what Jillian Rose has called Holocaust piety. Meaning, there's something, Holocaust piety is this thing where, this idea, first of all, the Holocaust was black and white. There were bad guys and good guys, end of story. Too simplistic, right?
What?
Too simplistic. Holocaust piety. All survivors were saints. All survivors were saints. Before the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, all saints, noble, good, charitable, kind, generous people. The Holocaust happened to people, period. All different kinds of people. And when you read Primo Levi, he doesn't shy away from that at all, right? Primo Levi lays it on the line. There was an enormous range of people, and that's what people are, diverse. All right, so Julian Rose comes along in 1996. She's extremely offended by Schindler's List, and this is when we start to get, there's no business like Shoah business, the Holocaust industry, the culture industry, and what we get is also a term called tragic tourism, where sites of tragedy, on the one hand, become a locus of meaningful engagement and learning, but also tourist traps.
The Nova Festival.
The Nova Festival is an excellent example, right?
Some people, I haven't seen it personally, but it's a tourist destination.
It has become a tourist destination, right? And it's on and on. I actually visited my first concentration camp in September. I went to, it wasn't a concentration camp, it was a prisoner of war camp, Theresienstadt. And I was there with my son, and we happened to get a guide and a few other people. It turned out we were all Jewish, but it wasn't necessarily clear from the outset, but we were. And then it became clear that everybody had a Holocaust connection. Some people had family who'd been in Theresienstadt, and it was very meaningful, it was very poignant. But there were school groups there, and they're throwing around a football, you know? It's not clear cut.
It's very complex.
It's very complex. Okay, so we have this quote from Gillian Rose. She is an extremely important scholar of literature and literary theory, and she writes this book, Mourning Becomes the Law, and she creates this term, Holocaust piety. And it's a controversial term, but an important term. And she described how the cultural industry packages the genocide into a sentimental, easily consumable product that lets people feel moral without doing any actual political work. Take that in for a moment. That's a heavy idea. Okay? Holocaust piety offers the spectator a relatively safe and predetermined position, comfortably distanced, where they can be assured of moral clarity and the satisfactions of pity and reverence. So this is the kind of easily digestible Holocaust movies, pulling the heartstrings and making everybody feel like they're on the right side, on the good side. Now today, by the way, this has gotten complicated with the Holocaust, because what's going on with anti-Semitism in the world in general has shifted. You cannot say Nazi and assume villain anymore, right? So it's interesting how these...
They call a lot of Israeli Nazis.
We're genocide now.
Right. And also, people are starting to say rather shocking things about the Holocaust and the Nazis, the Third Reich, Hitler, right? He's not necessarily the bad guy anymore.
Well, my parents were Holocaust refugees, I would say, from Austria. And my mother was parents were slumlords in confession in the Bronx. And she'd go around collecting rent. This is from Italian in the Bronx. And these Italians would say, Hitler should have burned you.
Right.
Then, in the 50s.
In the 50s, yeah. Yeah, so now it's, all right. So, against this backdrop of Holocaust piety comes along Rosenfarb's story, A Friday in the Life of Sarah Zondervan. And it makes the horrors of the Holocaust matter of fact. No sensationalism. So it's not saying, I'm gonna come at you and I'm gonna hammer you over the head. No, matter of fact, but somewhat understated. And after, the first few decades of Holocaust writing, Chava Rosenberg comes along and says, okay, it's time now for a different kind of storytelling, because the storytelling, we can't keep having the same kind of storytelling. It's not cinematic, it's not sensationalist. There's truth, there's anti-Semitism, there's barbarity, but it's not bombastic. The narrative is not designed to shock, and a lot of Holocaust literature today and a lot of Holocaust movies today feel they have to shock to get a reaction. That's another strategy she avoids. And it's clear from the outset of the story that it's extremely complicated to go from a kind of normative life in Europe to the concentration camps and find your way back to a somewhat run-of-the-mill life as a wife and mother in Montreal, Canada. How do you do that? You've gone through this experience that is a historic in a way that defies the imagination. Historic, not historic, the historic event of the decade, not the historic event of the century, a historic event in the experience of mankind, and then the next day, the next year, you're supposed to be just making lunches and heading to PTA. And I think the story really gives us an insight into how absurd that is, but also how it forces one to move forward. It forces one to move forward. And that normal life, when I say normal life, waking up in the morning, having work to do, people to take care of, a busy day, errands, very healing, even if it seems completely mundane compared to the horrors that one has faced. And I'm just going to pause, and we're framing this in terms of our own life experience here at this very time. And I think that after October 7th, for many of us, the idea of going grocery shopping or, doing laundry, taking care of the garden was just, it gave us a certain kind of psychological resilience, just those everyday things.
Grocery shopping, because during the war when we were having sirens, it was frightening to go shopping.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now it's like, oh, thank God we can go shopping with no being afraid.
Yeah, it's like when there's Iran and this is. All right. It's an on again, off again situation.
Especially after.
Okay, so now I want to look at the second quote, and we're going to here go a little deeper into the story, and I should really keep my eye on the time. We're going until what time?
I have 12:48. We have another 40 minutes.
1:30.
Till 1:30?
1:20.
Okay, so we're looking at the second source. Again, the Friday in the life of Sarah Zonabend. Okay, and Friday's become her litmus test for normalcy and what is going on, and where she registers in terms of the trauma grief spectrum. These are two paragraphs directly to the story. Would anyone like to read this out? Yeah, just in a nice, loud, clear voice, so everyone can hear.
Today was Friday. Sarah had a dread of Fridays. She had a superstitious anxiety about this day, an apprehensive fear of approaching danger, which she could not shake in spite of all attempts to reason with herself. She had always gotten the worst marks at school on a Friday. The war had broken out on a Friday. Her mother had died in the camp on a Friday. President Kennedy had been shot on a Friday. She had discovered on a Friday that her husband was unfaithful to her. On a Friday, she had gone to see the doctor, and on a Friday, she was operated on. In addition, she retained the memory of one late Friday afternoon after a selection in the camp. Those women whose lives had been spared returned to their barrack and climbed up onto their bunks in the dark. It was then that Crazy Bluma exclaimed, "Children, have you forgotten? Today is Friday, Sabbath Eve. Quick, let's light the candles and bless them." And in the dark, Bluma went through the motions of lighting the Sabbath candles, while all the other half-mad women in the barrack, those whose lives had so recently been spared, covered their faces with their hands and mumbled the blessing of the lights, whether they knew the words or not.
Wow. So, somehow we cling to routine. And this might be Crazy Bluma and the other women, but there's something about constancy and having kind of a map of routine that can heal. And we know one of the things that we've seen in Israel, and it's interesting, and I don't want to simplify this, oversimplify it. There has been a noted kind of shift towards tradition since October 7th. There's also been a shift away from tradition.
So, same with the Holocaust.
A lot of the hostages started observing Shabbat while in Asna.
Yes. And it's not, you could say, well, there's belief, right? But in Judaism, we have a lot of activity around belief, right? And those become routine. I always think, are there any men listening? I always think, one of the reasons we have Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv is women are very good at routine. Women are very good at, doing the next thing, doing what has to be done. Men sometimes can lose their way. And Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv kind of keep them on a path, There's routine for them. And not to say that women don't say Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv, certainly they do. But I think that they are very good at maintaining routine, independent of legally required prayer.
It's an excuse to leave the house.
Okay. So this idea of a few things here. I just want to note how the writing is very evocative, but not bombastic. We don't see emaciated women. We don't see what happened to the women who didn't come back to the barracks. She's very good. She's very careful about that. And I think this is saying, this is where we're at with the storytelling now. If I want my story to have impact, I have to be careful about not being too repetitive. Because there's something called in literary, cultural representations of the Holocaust, there's something called Holocaust fatigue. She doesn't want to submit to Holocaust fatigue. Oh, more of that. Oh, more Nazi guards. So she wants to tell her story, but she wants it to still be impactful. So we have that going on, and we have Fridays becoming an anchor, and of course Fridays is an important Jewish anchor. So it's an important Jewish anchor, and it is an important anchor in terms of general routine. So then I want to talk about one of the offshoots of routine, which is motherhood. Motherhood involves a lot of routine. Children need structure, right? They get up, they need to be fed, they need to be clean, they need to go off to daycare, they need their hair cut, they need their teeth brushed, right? Children involve a lot of routine.
Also, a lot of adaptation and away from routine. Stuff comes up and you have to figure it out.
Stuff comes out and you have to figure it out. So that's part of routine. That's part of the kind of that's a whole other level of coping. So we have this going on in the story, but it's interesting. There is a scholar named Jordan Paul, and she argues something very interesting. She says that, and we're going to look at it in the story, in Holocaust writing by women, the experience of motherhood is often a prickly experience, a somewhat compromised experience. And that the, let's say, joy, sense of fulfillment, sense of identity that motherhood often provides for women is somehow incomplete or obstructed for Holocaust survivors. That they've experienced such trauma that there's a piece of them that doesn't find that necessarily as recuperative or as fulfilling, because they simply themselves have had so much taken from them that the act of giving is a little bit complicated. And we see that in the story. So on the one hand, motherhood does force Sarah Zonabend to move past, right? She has to get up and make those lunches on Friday for her kids, but motherhood is complicated. So here's motherhood in the story. Sarah admits to herself that she is not sure if she loves or needs her son. There's no source for this. Moreover, she understands that mostly what is crucial for her is that he needs her. So it's a slightly different, now we could say, well, that's Sarah Zonabend's experience. But when you look at Holocaust writing by women, this kind of tainted motherhood comes up again and again. It's a recurring theme. And it's interesting, Cynthia Ozick wrote a short story that she transformed into a novella called The Shawl. The lead character is a woman named Rosa, and just to, I can't really sugarcoat it. The story starts off with Rosa in the camps, and she's holding her dead baby. And she won't let her go, and she says, no, I have to hold her and nurse her, and she won't let her go. And then she goes on to be a very complicated maternal figure, not surprisingly. So that's just another example. But we see this again and again. Going back to Sarah Zonabend, as to her daughter, she confesses that as the young girl has grown into adolescence, she finds this beautiful somebody to be a little like a stranger, and that this alienation is probably a result of her own collapsing identity. And this is something, again, we see with writing of women Holocaust survivors, writing about women survivors, writing women who went through the Shoah. Identity is complicated. Identity is complicated. What was my identity before? And is survivor my identity? Is hiding my survivor past my identity? Identity becomes very complicated. And this idea of being a mother and giving, that might become my identity, but if I never got to fulfill who I wanted to be myself, because think about Chava Rosenfarb going into the Lodz Ghetto at 18, she never really had those years to forge her own identity before becoming a mother who was giving, nurturing, and really sacrificing for her children. Okay. The second outlet that provides a routine for Sarah Zonabend, and this is extremely interesting, and this goes back to how much writing we have coming out of October 7th, is the everyday act of writing. Now, we think of writing is something that comes from a relative place of privilege. Let's think about October 7th, the horrors of the hostages. They couldn't write. How could they possibly write? No paper, no pen, no means to, not while they were hostages, after.
There are many.
Not in the beginning.
Who wrote while they were in captivity?
Yeah, they were saying they were writing the names of the people who were killed that they were hearing on the radio. So they
Where were they writing it?
What did they write?
Some of this is unheard. There was
On the wall.
Ariel
on the wall, baby, or scratching it into things because
And they wouldn't let them take it out.
very few were able to write. Very few. Writing requires something to write with. Writing requires time. It requires a certain amount of clarity. It requires a certain amount of intellectual space. And so writing becomes this kind of privilege. Obviously, in the ghettos, there was a lot of writing. Somehow people found paper. Somehow, in the concentration camps, there wasn't writing. And what people did was they spent a lot of time trying to memorize what they wanted to write. They did scratch it into things, into wooden beds, into walls, whatever else. But writing, when Sarah Zonabend is now in Canada and her life has returned to somewhat of a contemporary life, she's able to consider writing again, but it's not simple. And she keeps writing and she keeps stopping. And she's writing to her diary. She can let anyone read it. She's not going to let anyone read it. What is her diary to her? Is a diary a friend? Is a diary a therapist? What is a diary? So writing becomes a very complicated aspect of her whole experience. And it becomes this kind of somewhat important in her journey towards normalcy, but very important in terms of her own identity. So let's look at source 3, and again, looking at writing. And what we have here is the conflation of the most basic of tasks, going to the corner store to go buy some milk, with a kind of jolt of recuperation based on just living that gives her the energy, the will to write. So it's an interesting intersection between the everyday and the writing. She didn't go on a journey to Africa. She didn't go to an ashram in India. She went to buy milk. And that gave her the spark to start writing. Let's look at this text where it's number 3. It begins, Sarah took the bottle of milk. Would someone else like to read? Someone who hasn't read yet? But a nice, clear, loud voice. Okay.
Sarah took the bottle of milk in her hand. What a pleasant, cool whiteness it had. How good it was to hold it in her hand. She would have much loved to cool her half face against the bottle at that very moment, or open it and take a few sips. But no, she would not do that in public. She left the store. At the bus stop on the corner, the mailman was still standing, waiting for the bus to take him home. She was relieved. There had been no accident. She smiled at him. He glanced at her, and this time he lifted 2 fingers to the rim of his mailman's hat in a kind of military salute. How lovely that was. She fell in love with him on the spot. Mm-hmm. Yes, she fell in love, and perhaps that was really the only solution, the only answer to all the questions. That rare moment when one's personal loneliness saluted the loneliness of another, that moment was happiness. That was all there was to it. Can I continue?
Please.
With her entire being, she felt the beauty of this sunny afternoon in the fall. Yes, basically she was madly in love with life, and therefore terrified of her particular brand of loneliness, which heralded the approach of death. She was not the suicidal type at all. It would have never occurred to her to willingly stop her own heartbeat. Just the contrary, she could never get her fill of living. Hadn't she once written a story for her children about a fly born in the fall and how it was better to be alive in that season than not to be alive at all?
Okay. So she comes home, she goes to the store, she gets this milk. It is not a monumental event to go get some milk. But somehow, just going to get the milk, doing that, getting out, saying hello to the postman, connecting to another person, that was enough. And she comes home and she's able to pick up her pen again and return to that level of normalcy. So what I'm arguing in this story is that again and again, what we see is not a story that wants to take us into the bowels of the horrors of the Nazi assault on the Jewish people, but what it means to survive, to move forward, to renew, to live, to reclaim vitality. And it doesn't necessarily come from something that is a kind of monumental moment. It doesn't come from a once in a lifetime jolt of excitement. It can come from very basic things. And I think that even, in our own lives, going back to October 7th, and even events that maybe are not as necessarily as national, but sometimes when you have a hard time just getting things in order, moving ahead, waking up the next day and saying, okay, I'm going to get the washing machine fixed, right? It can kind of give you that spring to feel like there is a way to feel the nervous system kind of realign. Got my various papers here. So writing though, and I want to go to a sidebar here about writing. And this is an interesting concept, and I think it's interesting to think about in terms of writing for anyone, but Jewish people writing about the oppression that Jewish people experience. So one of the questions Sarah Zonabend has in the story is, in a post-Holocaust world, writing doesn't contain truth anymore. There used to be an idea. There was an idea up until what we call modernism. Modernism is really around World War I, that writing somehow used to contain truth. The writers, the great writers, Charles Dickens, George Eliot, Matthew Arnold, they wrote with a belief that what they were writing was important because they were seeking truth. Shakespeare was considered great because he was an expert at finding the truth in human nature. George Eliot said, if your writing does not somehow make the world a better place, then it has no purpose. Matthew Arnold believed that writing was ennobling. Percy Bysshe Shelley called writers the unfrocked legislators of the world, right? But this shifted after World War I. The world became a very jaded, cynical place. By the time Chava Rosenfarg's writing, we are now in a postmodern world where truth has become very slippery. And this is how postmodernism was once defined to me, and I think it's an excellent definition. It's not a question of asking existential inquiry of right and wrong. What are the answers? The question becomes, who even gets to ask the question? Who even gets to ask the question? Who is valid? Who is an invalid interrogator of truth? Is it the Jews? Is it the people who say the Jews are perpetuating a genocide? Is it all sorts of different people across the political spectrum? It's become very unclear. And so Sarah Zonabend says, how can I write in such a world where truth has become so unclear? Truth has become something where every time you write, what you write might be abused. And this goes back to our point about life is beautiful. We see life as beautiful and we get it. But we are what we call an informed audience. We know what Roberto Benigni is doing in that movie. The vast majority of people don't. And I just want to share an anecdote with you. More than 10 years ago, I was at the Museum of Tolerance. The Museum of Tolerance, not the Museum of Tolerance. In Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. Simon Wiesenthal, is that the one?
No, it's Rabbi Heyer's place in Los Angeles.
Tell us about it, we'll come back.
They all come back. And you know, it's basically a Holocaust museum in Los Angeles.
Elie Wiesel,
Martin Heyer built it. And we were there, we went for the whole tour with my family, we had a tour guide, and the tour guide tells us this story at the end. And the story is meant to illustrate the depth of ignorance in the American community. She says the following: last week, I had an elementary school class here, and we did a whole tour. And they're so unfamiliar with the Holocaust that by the end of the tour, one of the boys put up his hand and said, please remind me, which group was connected to the swastika and which group was connected to the Magen David? Now, she wanted
Maybe you
us
can
to
ask to see if they can get 2 kosher meals for us brought in. Yeah.
Could you repeat since the COVID pandemic?
Guys, we don't wanna listen to your lunch conversation.
Could you repeat please which group?
This young boy, the tour guide said last week, this young boy, after a 3-hour tour, asked me, now tell me, just again, which group was connected to the swastikas and which group was connected to the Magen David? Swastika. And her point was, look at the ignorance in the American community. But I'm thinking, look how bad your museum is. That boy's been here 3 hours and he doesn't know the difference, right? So this is, the issue is not necessarily how ignorant, but what is being promoted, what is being presented that we think is so informative, but is actually backfiring. And that's the issue with a movie like Life is Beautiful. It can really backfire. And here's another story, just to show you the flip side. Schindler's List at one point became a required field trip, movie outing for many schools in the United States. And they would ask kids, they would give them questionnaires afterwards, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, what they thought of the movie. And one school had a very interesting experience. A lot of the kids wrote the following: well, it was a really good movie, but obviously Steven Spielberg exaggerated to make it more dramatic. So, Holocaust representation is very, very problematic. Traumatic history representation is very traumatic. And we know with October 7th that it's very, very tricky. People see what they want to see. They believe it or they don't believe it, right? Documentation, footage. Oh, well, obviously Israel doctored that, right? This is an ongoing problem. And we have this in the story. So think about the story. Chava Rosenfarb writing this story in the 1980s, publishing it in Yiddish, not coming out with it in English for many more years, but already highly attuned to this problem. Now, one of the ways to combat that is through this idea of the everyday life. And what the everyday life says is people are going to do what they're going to do. Truth today is slippery. But I know my reality. I know my need to live. And this is my story. And I didn't do anything stupendous. I didn't do anything that was necessarily remarkable. But I put one foot in front of the other, and that was a healing experience.
That's remarkable.
Let's go. I'm making a mess of my notes here. Let's go to number 4. Number 4. Okay. Here's another quote from the story, and this is towards the end of the story, where she's really. I think this is so poignant. There's another story. Well, no, I'm not going to reference that story. I think it's different. Let's look at this passage. Our source number 4. A different reader. Great. Thank you very much.
Sarah entered the kitchen and started to peel some potatoes. She washed the lettuce. Suddenly, she dried her hands and reached into the table drawer for a pencil. The next moment, she was sitting at the kitchen table, bent over her old notebook, from which half of the pages, those filled with the notes from her former diary, were missing. Next to her lay the shavings of the peeled potatoes, and next to the bowl of the freshly washed salad stood the white milk bottle, which she had forgotten to put into the refrigerator. "Dear diary," she wrote, laughing softly to herself, like a little girl enthralled by the act of confiding a secret to her diary. "You are the only trip I am capable of taking, the only phone call that I am capable of making, the only letter I am both writing and receiving. Today is Friday, and thank heaven, nothing has happened."
Oh,
Doesn't that encapsulate the absolute mundane with the life spirit? It's I think it's very poignant.
It's also like very post-traumatic. I heard the Omri's wife saying every Shabbat, every Shabbat I go back to the timeline. This hour they came in the house, this hour was holding the baby, this hour they took Omri. It's like, it's also very post-traumatic.
Very post-traumatic.
It's not only like
Absolutely.
routine keeps us on track.
Absolutely, but they're doing Friday and they're doing Shabbat. So it takes you back, but you're doing it.
Still go forward.
You're doing it.
It's like a dual.
It is. It's doing it. I think the collapse would be, I'm not gonna recognize it's Friday. Right? Every Friday I'm getting into bed.
But here again, people who are not in the know can just.
It's a problem with Holocaust literature. There is a wonderful article by Robert Alter, and he wrote it in 1980 in commentary, and I refer to it all the time. And he really outlines some of the most prominent problems or challenges regarding Holocaust writing, and I think it's relevant for post-October 7th writing. And he says, what do you do with writing that seems too generic? It doesn't seem specifically Holocaust enough, because the uninformed reader will not grasp what's going on. And so you want to write in a way where the reader has to engage. If you feed the reader everything, they won't engage. They'll read it like they're just scanning, like, directions on, how to use your toaster. On the other hand, when you don't give them quite a bit of context, they can miss the point. And what do you do with that? And there's a fear. It's definitely, literature in general requires a lot of readers. In general, literature demands that the reader do some work. And it's a bit of a scary business. It's a bit of a risky business. If you pick up a novel, a novel about a totally different society, a totally different place. I'll give you an example. This is terrible. There is a award-winning novel called Things Fall Apart. I forget the author's name now. Achebe. Very important novel about Nigeria and the Igbo. And in the Igbo culture, how you assert your status is by being a very successful sweet potato farmer. Now, you really have to be willing to kind of go there and get into that world and that culture, because you're reading again and again about people having all these battles about who's got the bigger tower of yams. But it requires you to understand what that represented, understand what the power represented, understand that meant a resistance to Christianity. It meant that standing firm in your own culture. It meant that wealth was going to be married. The idea of a modern currency culture versus an agricultural culture were at risk. You have to do the work. If you don't, you just think, why is everyone fighting about sweet potatoes? Sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes.
Sweet potatoes.
Okay. I want to finish off. We have time? We have 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, I want to finish off with one thing Rosenfarb does that's interesting. Rosenfarb says that, I want to read you the quote. I think it's a very powerful quote. This is from an essay, going back to the essay Confessions of a Yiddish Writer. She says the following: I bore witness in the belief that there is no future for mankind if it refuses to face itself in the mirror of the Holocaust. Disturbing and horrifying though that mirror might be. She doesn't insist on revenge, but she certainly doesn't let people off the hook. Now, there are different ways that Holocaust survivors look at their experience. And there are a good many who will say the Holocaust was perpetrated by Nazis. Not every German was a Nazi. Not every German child embraced their parents' ideology. There are good people, there are bad people. Some really didn't feel they had a choice. Some were truly evil. But you have to give people the chance to be better and judge each person on their own basis. There are people who say, no, they were complicit. It's not enough to say, oh, I was just a good foot soldier, and you have to stand up for what is good, decent, moral, ethical, and right. So Thane Rosenbaum is a very interesting writer. He is a child of Holocaust survivors, and he's what is called a second-generation writer. He's also a lawyer and a very prolific writer on Jewish events. He comes along and says, no. He wrote an article on revenge, and he says the following. Let's go to number 5. The inadequacy of legal justice is one thing. Its outright failure is quite another. But in both cases, the attraction of a non-legal alternative is a powerful one. Vigilantism, basically. Are these vengeful feelings morally appropriate? The answer is yes, because the actual difference between vengeance and justice is not as great as people think. Legal systems should punish the guilty commensurate with their crimes and recognize a moral duty to satisfy the needs of victims to feel avenged.
Wow, back to an eye for an eye.
It's actually, yes, the article references an eye for an eye, and he says that very socially unacceptable, but very humanly important. Chava Rosenberg, her revenge is the revenge of the Jewish people. Keep going, keep living, keep moving forward. Although, in her own writing, she says, but that doesn't mean I'm letting anyone off the hook. And I expect everyone to face themselves in the mirror. So, everyday life wins. It wins over bombast. It wins over sensationalism, melodrama. It wins over, let's say, hardcore vengeance. But that doesn't mean anyone's let off the hook. And so this story I have shared with you because I think that in our predicament, it is a great model of what it means to move forward, to revitalize, to reclaim the life spirit, the joy, and a way to say that the Jewish people are not going to be stuck in trauma. So thank you very much.